Okay, so welcome everybody, and welcome to the people on the internet. It's great to be here tonight. We're starting another series of presentations. These are actually focused towards talking to people about the Bible and Jesus Christ who happen to be atheists at the moment, and we're trying to give you some ammunition in order to go forward and let you spread the word as we're commanded to do in Matthew 28:19 through 20, to go out and make disciples of all nations. Our mission statement for the Biblical Creation Science Group is exalt Jesus Christ, teach the Bible's truth, equip the saints to witness, and also actively disciple the world. So what we want to do tonight is we'd like to show how fulfilled Bible prophecy through history authenticates the Bible. The witnessing to an atheist essentially means they're not interested in the Bible. They may have read the Bible and rejected it, or they haven't read the Bible. So what we're trying to do is to get them to come to the table and read the Bible, understand it. And so this is the second in the series of our teachings on ways to witness to atheists and get them, if we can't use the Bible, we have a lot of problems to introduce the subject of Jesus Christ and the New Testament if they're unwilling to even read it. So, and what we want to do is through what Peter had written in the Bible, 2 Peter 1:19 through 21, we want to use the prophecies in the Bible in order to show that the Bible is true. So if we were walking along a beach and we stumbled upon a box buried in the sand, and we curiously opened it up, and there was an ancient book, and we were able to open it up and look inside, and we were able to read the language that it was written in, and it was predicting things that were going to happen in the future. And so we decided to take it home and put it on the shelf, and then a certain period of time later, one of those occurrences that the book had in it came true, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. So pretty soon you would think that that book was very special. And that's exactly what the Bible is. And I'm going to attempt tonight to try to show that in a limited way with the time I have. But I think there's some very, very important things that prophecy can actually soften the hearts of people who reject the Bible out of hand. So Peter says, the prophetic words confirm, know this first, that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation, for prophecy never came by the will of man, but holy men of God spoke as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. So the Bible comes to us, as Peter says, through interaction of men chosen by God to bring the information and make it in written form. So we have the more sure word of prophecy in order to convince people. That's one tool. If they're willing to listen, that's one tool that is very useful to talk to atheists. And this is a little cartoon I found. You know, the atheists are saying, do whatever you like on their sign, but they say, don't believe, don't pray, don't read the Bible. You know, everything's okay but being religious. But we know better. We know the Bible is the absolute truth of God, and so what we want to do is to share that and give everyone an opportunity to accept the saving grace that is offered as a free gift by Jesus Christ to all of us. So I have these two fellows here say they're looking at some piece of evidence, fossil from archaeology, And the one with the biblical mindset, he is saying great evidence for creation, and the other fellow is saying great evidence for evolution based on his atheism. But what we want to do during this talk is to transfer that thought process over to the other fellow. So last week, or 2 weeks ago, we did a study on how archaeology was one method of showing the truth that's in the Bible. So we quoted many different archaeological finds that substantiated the history of creation, the history of people with long lives before the flood itself, the time of Moses when he was having Pharaoh release the Israelites from their bondage, on and on and on. So each one of those things are in the Bible. We're also in cuneiform writing on tablets. They were written down. They weren't interpretations of broken pieces of pottery or something. They were actually written on papyrus. They were written on pots. They were written on stones in the walls of temples, etc. So that was one convincing argument. If the person has an open mind to archaeology and they believe that we're translating those tablets and all of those papyruses correctly. But this week I wanted to go a step further and go through just a tiny number of some of the prophecies that are in the Bible that actually have been fulfilled. There's approximately over 2,500 prophecies that appear in the Bible, and about 2,000 of them have already been fulfilled to the letter. That means 100%, no deviation. And so if that were in any other kind of secular circumstance, you would say, that's amazing, that's a miracle. And indeed it is. That's exactly what God has used in order to get our attention, basically. So what does biblical fulfillment of prophecy prove? And I claim the exact 100% fulfillment of the prophecies that are in the Old Testament are more than enough evidence to demonstrate the accuracy and the divine inspiration of the Bible and its truth. Because remember, only God can declare the end from the beginning and forecast to the very day things that are not yet done, as it says in Isaiah. So nobody in history can foretell the future. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We're not sure what's going to happen a year from now, and certainly not thousands of years from now. But the Bible does, because God is outside of time. He created time. He is outside of time. So time means nothing to him. As it says again in Peter, he is not influenced or affected by time. So I put together a little cartoon here that's kind of a simplified version of the logic of prophetic proof. Why is it so powerful? So on the left, we have the little cartoon prophet that's making a prophecy. He's prophesying maybe something is going to happen. You see the people fleeing from a act of conflagration, fire, and destruction. And then on the right, you see the evidence that that prophecy was fulfilled, 100%. So we can see the evidence with our eyes. We see the books that have been written about what's happened, and it tells exactly, these are secular journals, secular historians, exactly confirm what the Bible has taught. And I wanted to start off comparing, people might say, oh, well, there's a lot of sources that make predictions. Yeah, it's true. But are they 100% accurate? And this is one I found in one of the journals. A lot of people nowadays believe in astrology or horoscopes. They read them in the newspaper. They're printed based on the time you were born and what the signs are and how the constellations and stars move around. And so I found this paper. It's entitled "A Scientific Inquiry into the Validity of Astrology" by McGrew and McFall. It's in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 1990. So they did a scientific experiment. They took 6 professional astrologers and they took one control person who had no training whatsoever in astrology. They chose 23 different subjects of both sexes, different ages, different backgrounds, different races. And then they submitted their information to the 7 people, the 6 professionals plus the 1 control person. And then they examined the results based on what the predictions of these 7 people made. And so of the 23 people, the 6 astrologers were accurate from a low of 0 to a high of 3 out of 23, with a median of the 6 being 1. They got 1 out of the 23 that was pretty correct. The control subject, on the other hand, got 3 correct. So they beat the average astrologer by 3 times and in fact tied the most accurate astrologer with 3 right out of 23. But when the scientists put this information through analysis of probability, they came up with that no subject or astrologer or control performed the matching task at a level that was significantly beyond chance. So random chance, just by saying, well, this will happen to you, and this will happen to you, this will happen to you, that had as much accuracy as the best astrologer. Oh, another name you hear in the field of making predictions, prophecies, is Nostradamus. Nostradamus lived in the 1500s. He was a French doctor. He published a book called The Prophecies. He wrote it in French mainly. It spanned the time from 1500s to the year 2797. A long period of time. The only problem with that is if you've ever read any Nostradamus's predictions, they're called quatrains. There's 4 lines of predictions, and essentially the style of the prophecy is so multiformed and nebulous that each may, with a little effort and goodwill, find that, you know, you can make them say basically whatever you want them to say. They're airy. Some person said they're airy. They assume a vague structure. Figures that have spectators' imaginations tend to line things up with them and other things not. So it was described by one of his devotees as being a massive verbal jigsaw puzzle. And he became famous because there was a famous king that had died because he had been in a jousting contest with one of his lieutenants, and it said in one of his predictions when he wrote the book, 2 years later, this king died in this jousting contest, and it said the young lion will kill the old lion, and he'll die because of a wound to his eye. And so that's what propelled Nostradamus to his fame. But the person, and it said it was on the field of battle. Well, first of all, the jousting match took place at a wedding. That's not really a field of battle. He was struck by a shard of the broken lance when they were charging each other on the horseback, and that pierced his helmet, the king. but the fellow who was the one who killed the king was only 4 years younger than the king. So it wasn't the young lion versus the old lion. So, and then there's, if he's made these predictions over the, 1,500 year time span, there's so many out there that you could probably tie it to whatever you wanted. So he's been pretty much debunked. Let's go to the religious side. How about Joseph Smith, who is the prophet, considered a prophet of the Mormon religion? Joseph Smith lived in the early to mid 1800s. He was a religious leader, founded Mormonism, and he made many predictions of the prophet, but 3 of them that are called out is that he prophesied, because the Mormons were being persecuted by the U.S. government, he made the prediction that unless the U.S. government redresses the wrongs committed against the Mormon saints, that the U.S. government will be overthrown in a few years. And that was 1840s. Hasn't happened. He made a prediction that there would be a Mormon temple built in the city of Independence, Missouri, and that hasn't happened. And he also prophesied that his son, Joseph, would be the next prophet of the church. And that didn't happen because the leader that was elected by the people after Joseph Smith passed away was Brigham Young. So he's certainly not 100% accurate in his prophecies. The Quran also, if we wanted to look at Islam, it really doesn't make prophecies in the same way that the Bible makes prophecies. It essentially tells what Allah is going to do either to people or groups of people after they die or after the world has come to an end. So they really can't verify what is happening to a dead person in the spirit world, or we can't corroborate what's going to happen at the end of the world because it hasn't happened yet. So the Quran just doesn't make any prophecies that you can correlate against. But the Bible does. So the prophecies in the Bible, when we read the good news in the scripture to our non-believing friends, and they challenge us, why should we believe in the Bible? One of the strongest reasons to give non-believers is the thousands of prophecies in the Bible that are known to come to fruition with 100% accuracy. And it might be in 10 years or 100 years or even thousands of years later. But they're all extremely accurate. And in fact, God in the Old Testament, He declares in Isaiah, I am the Lord, Yahweh, that is my name. I will not give my glory to another or my praise to idols. See, the former things have taken place, and the new things I declare before they spring into being. I announce them to you. So that's Isaiah 24, 8 and 9. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known from ancient times what is still to come. Another, that's Isaiah 44, 9, 10. And who is like me? Let him proclaim it. Let him declare what is yet to come. Yes, let him foretell what will come. Isaiah 44, 7. So God's own challenge for authenticating what is written is that He's challenging people that are idol worshipers. They might worship Baal, or they might worship Asherah. So He's challenging those people that are worshiping idols to come forth with prophecies that come true. And even Jesus Christ, He used prophecies to convince His apostles to believe. And it says prophecy is one tool that Jesus used to convince His apostles to believe. John 13, 19. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am He. And the Bible is true because of the prophecies, and the mathematical probability of multiple prophecies occurring by random chance is operationally impossible. And I'll show you that calculation at the end of the talk. But the Christian faith is based on faith, but not faith that is blind faith. It's based on logic, observation, and what we know to be true. So, try to get into it now a little bit deeper. Since the prophecies happen to biblical people, and often the Bible is rejected completely by atheists, we have to choose and show them the prophecies that are fulfilled by prophesying about nations and people and places and events that are recorded in history. So that's the focus that we're going to pursue. And I found this list in that Rose book of charts. This is a listing of the prophets from the Old Testament, and it gives where they were prophesying, who the kings were when they were ruling. It gives, importantly, the approximate date that they were active in their prophecies, and the person's place of birth. So this table is very useful in order to give the time frame of when the prophecies were made. And normally the prophecies might have been tens, at a minimum of tens, but usually hundreds or more, sometimes thousands of years. And you'll see that as we walk through there. But this is the list of prophets that are being analyzed. So let's jump into the first one. This is Jeremiah, and it says, Jeremiah 21:7 is, I will deliver Zedekiah, king of Judah, his servants and the people into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, into the hands of their enemies. So that's the first prediction. And then the second prediction, after 70 years to be accomplished at Babylon, will visit you and perform my good word toward you and cause you to return to this place. So this has, it's not nebulous. It tells who? King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He's a real historical person. What would happen? He would attack the people of Judah. What else would happen? He would defeat the people of Judah and carry them away to captivity in Babylon. The period of time that would last is 70 years, and then Judah's restoration would be taken back to their homeland. So we can dissect this in the fulfillment stage. If you look at it, when the prophecy was made was about 626 BC. Archaeology and ancient history confirm the precise fulfillment of the 6 prophecies of Jeremiah, starting in the year 606 BC, 20 years after the prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar's army subdued Judah, taking thousands of Jews captive to Babylon and other nations. In 605, there was additional people that were carried away. In another quote from Jeremiah, Babylonian captivity of Judah lasted until Babylon fell to the Medo-Persian Empire. And King Cyrus, the Persian king, decreed in 536, that was 70 years later, from 606, that the Jews could return to their land. Many of them did, although not all of them. It was not promised that all would return, and they would return in time in order to start rebuilding the temple. So what I did on these prophecies was I put together a scorecard. Hopefully you can see that. So I kind of make a template. So the biblical scorecard has who, that's Jeremiah, the Bible verse, what was prophesied. So the prophecy was that Judah would fall to Babylon, and then the second part of the prophecy was reconstruction 70 years later. The time it was prophesied, 626, and then there are two dates for the fulfillment was the 606, the 20 years, and then the return to Judah in 536. And I put down there, did the prophet have control? So if a king is predicting, I predict there will be a war between my country and the next neighboring country, then he can make that happen. So Jeremiah had no way of making this happen. And the other thing, was it 100% accurately fulfilled? And the answer is yes. Daniel, in his famous reading of the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, just like Joseph in Egypt, that he was able to read the dreams of people held in prison with him to the Pharaoh, which gained him access to a high position in the Egyptian royal court. The same thing with Daniel, was an advisor to the king, and he recognized in Nebuchadnezzar's dream that his dream represented a giant statue, and the statue represented 4 different future kingdoms. Actually, one current kingdom, that was Babylon, which Nebuchadnezzar was head of, and then 3 more additional kingdoms in the future. And then a 4th kingdom that would be lasting until today. And so he was talking about the precious metals. He was saying, you are the head of gold, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your kingdom is wonderful. You're the first of the kingdoms, but then after you, there will be another kingdom which is represented by silver, and that will be inferior to yours. Then there will be a 3rd kingdom that will be represented by bronze, and then there will be a 4th kingdom that would be represented by Rome. And then finally, there will be the feet of this statue, which represents a kingdom that is strong, but also has the roots of fragility. So it's half iron, half clay. So it's strong, but it can be broken apart. And that's shown in this cartoon that has the Babylon was from 605 BC to 539 BC. And then the arms, there are 2 arms in this statue. So this is the union of the Medes and the Persians. So it was a Medo-Persian empire. It lasted from the end of the Babylonian Empire to 331 BC. Then the belly and the thighs of bronze, that represented Alexander the Great and his subsequent generals that took over after he was killed from 331 BC to 168 BC. And then the legs of iron when Rome conquered the Grecian Empire and extended that empire, and it lasted from 168 BC to 476 AD when the northern tribes came and overthrew Rome. And then finally the toes of iron and clay, that represents the divided nations of Europe that exist from then until today. So that prophecy was fulfilled exactly as it was told in all of the forms, and it's interesting to note that the European Union, sometimes called the EU, that has as its foundation document that there can be no more than 10 states. The number of states have fluctuated since it was formed, but it has in its founding document that there can be no more than 10. So it might have not all have been fulfilled yet. Also having to do with Daniel, It tells about the decree of rebuilding Jerusalem, and also the fact that the Messiah, the Prince, shall come to that country, and it specifies the exact number of years, 483 years, from the decree that Cyrus had to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah comes in his triumphal entrance into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. And actually, people have done a very accurate counting of time, and they can tell by other references to the exact day that this prophecy, and Rob, I think, has gone through it in our Sunday service, that the number of days from this prophecy until Jesus rode in on Palm Sunday was the exact to the day number of days. And it said that the Messiah would be cut off or killed, and those events would take place prior to the second destruction of Jerusalem, which we know happened in 70 AD when Titus set siege to Jerusalem and tore the temple down brick by brick, so that all that's left is rubble. And so the scorecard for that, it's Daniel 9:25-26, the decree to Jerusalem to be rebuilt, and then the coming of Christ. He was accurate. His time frame of the prophecy was 500 BC. So these events took 178,880 days to the day. So I would say that would be fulfilled 100%. Then Micah, he prophesied that this Messiah would be born in Bethlehem Ephratah. It's actually, I looked it up, and there were two Bethlehems at the time of Christ in Judea. And so Micah accurately picked the right one of the two. And he prophesied that 700 years before the Messiah was born. And I think the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem is both recorded in the Bible, obviously, but it's also recorded in secular history. It's one of the most celebrated facts in history with our Christmas season. So here's the scorecard. 700 BC was the prophecy, and 3 BC was the date of birth. And then Zechariah 11:11 and through 13. The statement, this has to do with the betrayal of Jesus Christ for 30 pieces of silver, which was the price of a slave at that time, and also that the Lord said to throw the money in the temple, and because it was blood money, the Sadducees and Pharisees used it to buy what they call the potter's field. That's where people in Jerusalem who were indigent, that's where they were buried. So it was for both the people who were visiting Jerusalem and died, and people who didn't have money for burial. So that was fulfilled to the smallest detail. And so the scorecard on that is, again, 100%. Jesus betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. It was prophesied in 520, and it happened in 32 AD. Also, Zechariah and King David in the Psalms, they predicted that the Messiah would die and be pierced, a description of crucifixion, pierced with the nails in his hands and in his feet, and also the crown of thorns. And that prediction was made hundreds of years, 400 years before crucifixion was even invented as a form of capital punishment by the Romans. So that was carried out, and historians have noted, and it's both biblical and extra biblical, that Jesus of Nazareth died on a Roman cross. He suffered an extraordinarily quick death, eliminating the need for breaking the bones in his legs so that he would suffocate. And they used a spear was thrust into his side in order to prove that he was dead. And that scorecard also is 100%. So Zechariah 12:10 and Psalm 22, crucified and coming to pass between 1,000 and 500 years later. And then another prophecy from Isaiah having to do with the rebuilding of Jerusalem. And this has to do, the prophet foretold that a conqueror named Cyrus would destroy seemingly impregnable Babylon. Babylon was a tremendous city, large city. They said it was had an area of almost 200 square miles, enclosed with these double-walled fortress. And Cyrus came in and found the weak link in the Babylon defenses, which he diverted the river, the Tigris River, and that water over the evening dissipated, and he was able to march his troops under the wall where the rapidly flowing river used to be. And so he was able to enter without any fight, and the people, being night, they had let their defenses down to a minimum, and so that was accomplished. And Isaiah made the prophecy 150 years before Cyrus was born, and 180 years before Cyrus performed any of these feats. And even 80 years before the Jews were taken into exile to Babylon. So he was predicting these things hundreds of years before they even happened. So the scorecard there is another 100% with Isaiah, with the Jerusalem rebuilding, Cyrus conquering Babylon, all within the time frame that is given. And then Isaiah and Jeremiah, the fall of Babylon. Again, this one has the square miles, 196 square miles, and again, it was supposed to be a indestructible city, just like, I guess, the Titanic was an unsinkable ship, right? So if the Lord wants something done, it gets done. And they said in their prophecies, these prophets further claimed that the ruins of the city of Babylon would be avoided by travelers, and the city would never again be inhabited. And the stones would not even be moved to build other buildings in a similar location. And the scorecard on that is, again, 100%, where Babylon fell. And the fulfillment, the prophets had no way of predicting that. And it was really interesting to me that I recall that Saddam Hussein had grandiose plans when he was in his presidency, that he wanted to rebuild Babylon. Not a good idea. right? So when he started to rebuild, he actually started to rebuild Babylon, but before he could complete it, he had the encounter with a desert storm and came out on the short end. And so Saddam Hussein learned the truth of the Bible. It never will be inhabited again. And the prophecy of even to modern days, 2,600 years later, the exact location and construction sequence of modern Jerusalem's 9 suburbs were predicted by Jeremiah 2,600 years ago. You've referred to the time of this building as the last days, and this is a time period of Israel's second rebirth as a nation in the land of Palestine, and the rebirth became history in 1948. You remember that, Marty? I'm sure. And the construction of the 9 suburbs went forward precisely in the location and the sequence predicted. So again, the scorecard is 100%. And this one spans from 626 BC to 1948 AD. Moses and also predicted the fulfillment of the rebirth of Israel in Deuteronomy, and also Jeremiah, Hosea, and Luke all mentioned that the Jews would someday return to the land of Palestine to reestablish for a second time their nation. And that same time frame, 607 BC, 70 AD, and 1948 were when that was accomplished, the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Jeremiah and Joshua predicted that the land of Edom, which today is most of Jordan, would become barren, uninhabited wasteland. And this description accurately tells about that bleak region. Even though the land is fertile and the water is plentiful, they still have not rebuilt that area to be productive. It's barren wasteland. And the prophecy of David in Psalm 83, 1:8, he talks about the enemies of Israel growl. They rear their heads with cunning. They conspire against your people. They plot against those you cherish. Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation. Israel's name will be remembered no more. That's what the enemies say. If you look at the map today, here's the map of the Muslim countries that are united in the red area against tiny little Israel here. So you can see that that prophecy by David has come true, where the Muslim empire has expanded, and they're all united with one goal, is to destroy Israel. And then the final one is Ezekiel, where he said, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I will take the Israelites out of nations where they have gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back to their own land. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. There will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. And when Israel was reestablished, it was actually reestablished by a man, the president. His name was David Ben-Gurion. So this prophecy again has been fulfilled about 2,600 years. It took 2,600 years to fulfill a prophecy, but it was fulfilled 100%. So the conclusion, the powerful truth of the Word of God in the Bible is inescapable, I believe. The presentation that I've shown you could go on and on and on and on, repetition after repetition after repetition. But it's clear that the Bible's specific predictions come true 100% in accuracy and fulfillment. And the Bible meets the challenge which God and Jesus Christ set out to predict events of human history with 100% accuracy before they happen. So I want to digress just 1 second. So I have there was a paper I found where they took 10 of the biblical prophecies. I won't bore you by reading them again. But they had professional statisticians go through and say, what is the chance of this happening by chance, by random chance? Is it 1 in 10, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1 billion, 1 in 100 billion? What are the chances? So Israel's long-awaited Messiah would begin his service 483 years after issuing the decree, 100,000 to 1. Micah naming the exact village of Bethlehem as the birthplace of the Messiah, 100,000 to 1. Zechariah declaring the Messiah would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, 100 billion to 1. Zechariah described the Messiah's death in words that depict the crucifixion, 10,000 billion to 1. Isaiah foretold the conqueror named Cyrus would destroy seemingly impregnable Babylon, 100,000 billion to 1. The ruins that would be avoided by travelers of Babylon, and it would never be inhabited again, 1 billion to 1. The exact location and construction of Jerusalem's 9 suburbs, 1 billion to 1. The prophet Moses foretold that some editions the ancient Jewish nation would be conquered twice and that the people would be carried off as slave each time, 100 billion to 1. Jeremiah predicting that despite its futility and despite access to water, the land of Edom would be barren today, 100,000 to 1. And Joshua's prophesied that Jericho would be rebuilt by a single man, that's 10 million to 1. So if you look at all of those prophecies, the Bible prophecies happening by chance are 1 chance in 10 to the 125th power, and we know anything that's larger than 1 in 10 to the 50th power is operationally impossible. So that is impossible. And they said in this paper, in truth, the Bible record may be said to be vastly more reliable than the law of gravity. So that's the theoreticians, and these were secular people that were looking at these projections of what the probability were, and because those were all independent projections, you just multiply the probabilities together. So, you know, you can ask your atheistic friends, do your own estimate of probabilities. How probable do they think those things are? And still, no matter what numbers you use, those were only 10 of the 2,000 prophecies that are in the Bible. And if you look, I didn't do the ones for Jesus, but there are 200 accurate prophecies about our Lord Jesus Christ in the Bible, and those have all come true. So that's even neglecting those. So conclusion, the rational person, when confronted with these biblical facts, must conclude that the prophecies are not just utterances of mortal men, but the words of an eternal entity that is outside of time. That's our Lord, our God. These 100% accurate prophecies are not predictions, but statements of history that just happened to be made at a time before they had happened. So I challenge you, you can take this to your atheistic friends and ask them, can you afford to ignore the Bible and its accurate description of coming events, much less miss out on the immeasurable blessings offered to anyone who believes and trusts Jesus Christ? Would you reasonable person take lightly God's warning of judgment for those who reject what they know to be true about Jesus Christ and the Bible? So with that, I say thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.